Hello. Hi, and welcome to Learning Tree, where we have short talks on big ideas in early education. I want to welcome the early educators and the parents who are joining me tonight, and we are going to be discussing learning, and I specifically want to look at two aspects of learning. The first, rote learning, which is that kind of learning that we do over and over, practicing things like ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, where children don't really understand what they're memorizing. They're just memorizing information. If you ask a child, they can sing the ABCs, they don't really recognize the A, and they don't understand it has an A sound. But they're learning it, so we do it over and over again. For some children, I'll do something like, if their name's Amber, I'll say, Amber, your name is Amber. Amber starts with an A, and sometimes I'll do that over a dozen times a day. Rote learning is great for foundational information and facts that we build on. And so it's an important part of learning, but it tends to not take that information and allow it to go and be processed in the brain into long-term memory, which really in learning, we want that information to go into long-term learning so we can build on it. That's that prior knowledge, those schemas that we are building on, more information and more experiences so children can learn. The other kind of learning, which I think is super important, is meaningful learning. And meaningful learning takes on a different pathway in the brain and in cognitive function, and that's really what cognitive function is in the brain. It's processed differently in that meaningful learning wants to engage multiple senses. So we all learn about sensory learning. We also have meaningful learning in relationships and those trusted people and more knowledgeable peers, as Vygotsky had shared in his zone of proximal development, which is that place where children are being challenged, not too much, but just enough, and there comes along a peer who knows how to do something like playing with a shovel, and the younger child sees that, and they're not quite sure how, but they can learn from that more knowledgeable peer. And in that challenge and in that playtime, have that meaningful moment where they can learn that skill that they didn't have before. And it's the right kind of pushing. So it's meaningful learning. And that kind of learning goes into the long-term memory. And it's super important to have that kind of learning. Tonight I want to share a little bit. I have a great passion for sensory learning, and there's lots of reasons why. Sensory learning has more to do about teaching approaches than it has to do about a child's maybe learning style. And next time we meet, we're going to talk about those approaches, those teaching approaches versus these myths about learning styles in children, because I think that puts the burden on the child instead of on the teacher, having techniques and modifications that help children to learn. But tonight, a lot of my references that and the topics that I'm speaking on will be listed below in the written part of the YouTube, and you can look at them. But most of what I am speaking on tonight comes from a book by Carey called How We Learn, The Surprising Truth About When, Where, and Why It Happens. It's a great book that really talks about different kinds of learning and approaches, and really the cognitive processes that are going on. What's going on in the brain when a child's in different settings and a child is learning in different ways. He does say something about, I put together some information here about I just wanted to read this quote. It's actually a Goodstart story or article. It says here, and talking about sensory learning, which is the meaningful learning I'm talking about, that sensory learning is providing opportunities for children to actively use their senses as they explore the world through sensory play. It's critical to brain development. We're becoming more aware of these cognitive approaches. And what it does, it opens the door for the brain to have many, many different parts of it to fire and to activate for learning to be long-lasting. So environments should be filled with different ways that children can activate their senses for meaningful learning to happen. You can't just rely on rote learning, so let's think of some ways that we use rote learning and some ways that we can take the rote learning that we're doing and let's apply some meaningful approaches to it. Let's differentiate that, because some children are going to respond to one way and some will respond to another. So let's think about routines. Routines are super important in young children. So when they're brushing their teeth, there's rote learning that's going on. What do we do first? We put the toothpaste on the toothbrush. How do we hold our toothbrush? We're going through all these things, and hopefully you'll have it down to 3 or 4 steps, and you repeat those steps. Repeat them. We do it with hand washing. First, we turn on the water, get a little, and then we rub the bubbles, and then we rinse it off, 1, 2, 3, and then we shut off the water, and then we go and we pat our hands dry, 1, 2, 3, and we do that all day long. So, but during those times, how can we take meaningful learning? Because those children are feeling water. They're tasting things. What are you tasting? Does that taste like something? What is that? It smells? I smell it. Did you smell it? What does it smell like? Oh, it smells like gum. Oh, it smells like gum. It does. What about the water? What kind of water? Do you like that water nice and cold when you rinse your mouth? Or do you like it not too cold? How does that feel when you're rinsing your mouth? Can I hear? Are you making a sound? There's ways that we can provide that interaction with the senses that is activating as we go through the rote learning. I hope you can think of some things that you're doing in your classroom that have to do with these routines. And I hope you will take a moment to maybe jot down a few open-ended questions, a few ways that you can help in that memory process to learn those steps by connecting them to the senses, by helping the children to connect to those senses. So they're not just going through the motions without real connections to what they're doing, but they're actually having some meaningful moments. And a great thing to do is once you see a child begin to express what they're doing, how it's feeling, encourage them to tell another buddy, another friend that's standing next to them that's getting ready to brush their teeth. Because again, we're supporting that. Liv Vygotsky, who's one of the theorists that is part of our foundations, that more knowledgeable peer that is helping that child that's just learning, that maybe doesn't have that skill yet, learn that skill. Well, this is just a few minutes to talk about some big ideas in early education. But I hope it gave you a chance to pause, and I hope it'll give you a chance to reflect on ways that you can add meaningful learning into the rote learning. This is Roxanne Weaver again from Learning Tree. Thank you for joining me.